My name is Zafira, and I am 34 years old. I am standing in the most beautiful wedding venue I have ever seen, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and white roses. My baby brother is getting married today. The same brother I raised since he was 8 years old after our parents died in a car crash. I gave up everything for him, my dreams, my youth, my future. I thought today would be the day he finally thanked me. But when I found my seat, my place card did not say my name. It said one word, Freeloader. Before we dive into what happened next, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you believe family should never treat each other this way, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Trust me, what I did next changed everything. Let me take you back 15 years to the small town in Ohio where I grew up. We lived in a modest 2-story house with a wraparound porch and a backyard, where my father built a wooden swing set with his own hands. My father was a carpenter. He had rough palms and gentle eyes, and he could fix anything that was broken. My mother was a nurse who worked the night shift at the local hospital. She always smelled like lavender soap when she came home in the morning, and she would make us pancakes before collapsing into bed. We were not rich by any means. Our furniture was secondhand, our vacations were camping trips to the state park, and Christmas presents were practical rather than extravagant. But our home was filled with something money could never buy: love. Genuine, unconditional, messy, beautiful love. We ate dinner together every single night. We played board games on Sundays. We said "I love you" before bed and meant it every single time. My brother Marcus came along when I was 11 years old. I remember the day my parents brought him home from the hospital. He was so tiny, wrapped in a blue blanket, with a full head of dark hair and the biggest brown eyes I had ever seen. I held him in my arms and made a silent promise that I would always protect him. I did not know then how seriously life would test that promise. Growing up, Marcus was my shadow. He followed me everywhere, copying everything I did. When I learned to ride a bike, he wanted to learn too. When I joined the school choir, he begged our parents to let him sing with me. I never minded. Having a little brother who adored me was the greatest gift. By the time I was 18, my life was full of possibility. I was the valedictorian of my high school class. I had been accepted into one of the most prestigious architecture programs in the country, with a full scholarship covering tuition, room, and board. My dream was to design buildings that would stand for centuries, structures that would outlive me and tell stories long after I was gone. My parents were so proud. They threw me a graduation party in our backyard, and my mother cried happy tears as she hugged me. 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave for college, everything changed. It was a Saturday night. My parents were going to a party at their best friend's house to celebrate their wedding anniversary. Marcus and I were staying home. He was 8 years old, and I was supposed to babysit. The rain started around 9 o'clock. Heavy, relentless rain that turned the streets into rivers. I put Marcus to bed around 10, reading him his favorite book until his eyes grew heavy. Then I fell asleep on the couch watching a movie. The phone rang at 2:17 in the morning. I will never forget that time as long as I live. It was the state police. There had been an accident. A truck had hydroplaned on the wet highway and crossed the median. My parents' car had been hit head-on. They were pronounced dead at the scene. I do not remember much of the next few hours. I remember screaming. I remember falling to my knees. I remember Marcus running downstairs in his pajamas asking why I was crying, and I remember holding him so tight that he started crying too, even though he did not understand yet. The funeral was held 4 days later. Relatives I barely knew flew in from across the country. They patted my head and told me to be strong. They whispered to each other about what would happen to us now, as if Marcus and I were problems to be solved, rather than children who had just lost everything. After the service, there was a meeting at our house. My Aunt Ruth, my mother's older sister, was there. She lived in California in a beautiful house with a swimming pool. She drove a luxury car and wore designer clothes. Surely she would take us in. She was family after all. But when the social worker asked if she would be willing to become our guardian, Aunt Ruth shook her head. She said she was sorry, but she could not take on that kind of responsibility at this point in her life. She had her career to think about, her lifestyle. Adding 2 children to the mix would be too much of a burden. Burden? That was the word she used, as if Marcus and I were weights that would drag her down. The other relatives made similar excuses. Too old, too far away, too busy, not enough space, not enough money, not enough love. The social worker explained that if no family member stepped forward, Marcus would be placed in foster care. He was only 8. He would enter the system and possibly be separated from me since I was legally an adult. I looked at my baby brother sitting on the couch, clutching the stuffed bear our father had given him. His eyes were red from crying. He had not spoken in 2 days. The thought of him being taken away, placed with strangers, possibly bounced from home to home, was unbearable. So I made a decision that changed the entire course of my life. I told the social worker I would become Marcus's legal guardian. I would raise him myself. I was 19 years old. I had no job, no income, no idea what I was doing. But I had love, and I believed with everything in me that love would be enough. That night, I called the university and declined my scholarship. I gave up my dream of becoming an architect. I gave up the future I had worked so hard for. And I have never regretted that choice. Not once. Not until the day my brother's place card called me a freeloader. The first year was the hardest. I went from being a carefree teenager on the brink of adulthood to being a single parent overnight. Our parents had left behind a small life insurance policy and the house which was paid off. But the life insurance money went quickly. Property taxes, utility bills, groceries, school supplies, medical checkups. A growing boy needs new clothes every few months, and those costs add up faster than you can imagine. I took the first job I could find as a barista at a coffee shop downtown. My shift started at 5 in the morning, which meant I had to wake up at 4:30, get dressed in the dark, and leave Marcus sleeping in his bed. I left him notes on the kitchen counter telling him I loved him and that his breakfast was in the microwave. A neighbor, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, agreed to check on him in the mornings before school. The coffee shop job paid minimum wage. It was not enough. So I took a second job as a cashier at the grocery store 3 blocks from our house. I worked there from noon until 6, which gave me just enough time to pick Marcus up from his after-school program and make dinner before collapsing from exhaustion. Even with 2 jobs, we barely scraped by. There was a week in November when I had exactly $12 left until my next paycheck. I bought rice beans and the cheapest vegetables I could find. I made the same meal every night for 7 days. Marcus never complained. He ate everything I put in front of him and said, "Thank you," after every meal. But $12 could only stretch so far. By the 5th day, there was not enough food left for both of us. So I started skipping meals. I told Marcus I had eaten at work that I was full, that I was not hungry. The truth was, my stomach ached with emptiness, but I would rather starve than let him go without. On weekends, I took a 3rd job cleaning offices in a downtown building. The work was backbreaking, vacuuming endless carpets, scrubbing toilets, emptying trash cans filled with coffee cups and takeout containers. Sometimes I found loose change on desks, quarters, and dimes that people had forgotten. I always left them where they were, even when I was so desperate that every cent mattered. I averaged about 4 hours of sleep per night. My eyes had permanent dark circles. My hands were chapped and rough from cleaning chemicals. I lost weight I could not afford to lose. But none of that mattered as long as Marcus was fed, clothed, and happy. And despite everything, he was happy. That was what kept me going. He thrived in school. His teachers sent home glowing reports about his kindness, his curiosity, his natural talent for math and science. He made friends easily and was always being invited to birthday parties and sleepovers. I drove him to every single one, even when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open on the road home. But it was not just the practical things. Raising a child alone meant being both mother and father disciplinarian and comforter, teacher, and friend. When Marcus had nightmares about the accident, I held him until he fell back asleep. When he got into fights at school with boys who mocked him for not having parents, I sat with him afterward and taught him that his worth was not defined by cruelty. When he needed to learn how to ride a bike without training wheels, I ran beside him for hours until he found his balance. I taught him how to tie a necktie using YouTube videos because our father was not there to show him. I helped him write his first love note to a girl in 6th grade. I sat in the front row at every single one of his basketball games, cheering so loud that he pretended to be embarrassed, even though I knew he secretly loved it. My own social life evaporated completely. Friends from high school gradually stopped inviting me to things. They were going to parties, dating, exploring the world. I was changing diapers and packing school lunches. We simply had nothing in common anymore. I went on exactly 2 dates during those years. Both ended in disaster. The first guy ran for the hills when I mentioned I was raising my 8-year-old brother alone. The second one stuck around for 3 weeks before admitting he was not ready for that level of responsibility. After that, I stopped trying. Marcus was my priority. Everything else could wait. Years passed. Marcus grew from a traumatized little boy into a confident young man. He shot up in height until he was a full head taller than me. His voice deepened. He started shaving using a razor I bought him for his 14th birthday, along with a can of shaving cream and a careful set of instructions I'd printed from the internet. When he was 17, we sat together at the kitchen table and filled out college applications. His grades were excellent, his extracurriculars impressive, his essays heartfelt and genuine. I helped him write those essays, editing draft after draft until they shone. The acceptance letters came in spring. Multiple schools wanted him, but the best offer came from a university on the East Coast. They offered a partial scholarship that covered about 60% of his tuition. The rest would need to come from loans or family. Family. That meant me. I took out loans in my own name to cover the gap. I would be paying them off for decades, but I did not care. My baby brother was going to college. He was going to have the future I had given up, and that was worth any price. The day I dropped him off at his dormitory, I cried the entire 4-hour drive home. The house felt emptier than it had ever felt before, but I was also filled with pride. I had done it. I had raised him. Against all odds, with no help from anyone, I had kept my promise to that tiny baby I held in my arms 20 years earlier. I believed foolishly, perhaps, that our bond was unbreakable. I believed that all those sacrifices had built something permanent between us. I believed that no matter what happened, Marcus would always remember where he came from and who had been there for him. I was wrong. Marcus met Priscilla during his junior year. He mentioned her casually at first, just a girl from his economics class who was smart and pretty. But within weeks, her name was in every conversation. Priscilla said this. Priscilla thinks that. Priscilla invited him to some event. I was happy for him. Young love is a beautiful thing, and he deserved to experience it. The first time I saw her picture on social media, I felt a small twinge of unease that I could not explain. She was undeniably gorgeous. Blonde hair, perfectly styled, flawless makeup designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly income. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a magazine not in the arms of my brother from small-town Ohio. I pushed the feeling aside. I was being unfair, judging someone based on appearances. Maybe she was kind. Maybe she was down to earth despite her obvious wealth. Maybe she would love Marcus for who he truly was. Our phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Where Marcus used to call me every day, it became every few days, then once a week, then once every couple of weeks. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, rushed eager to end the conversation. I invited him home for Thanksgiving that year. We had spent every single Thanksgiving together since our parents died. It was our tradition. I would cook the entire meal from scratch, the same recipes our mother had used, and we would sit at the same table where we had sat as a family. Marcus said he could not make it. Priscilla's family had invited him to their estate in Connecticut, and it would be rude to decline. He said he would come home for Christmas instead. He did not come home for Christmas either. I ate Thanksgiving dinner alone that year for the first time in my life. The turkey was too big for one person. The mashed potatoes went cold before I could finish them. I sat at the kitchen table surrounded by empty chairs and tried to convince myself that this was normal. Children grow up. They start their own lives. It does not mean they love you any less. But something had changed. I could feel it in my bones. In February, I drove 4 hours to visit Marcus at his apartment near campus. I wanted to surprise him to see his living space to meet this Priscilla who had captured his heart. I brought homemade cookies, his favorite kind chocolate chip with walnuts. When Marcus opened the door, his face fell for just a second before he recovered and smiled. Priscilla was sitting on the couch behind him, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, and her eyes traveled slowly from my face to my feet and back again. I was wearing jeans, a sweater I had owned for years, and sneakers that had seen better days. My hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. I had not had time for makeup that morning. Priscilla smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. She said it was so nice to finally meet me, that Marcus had told her so much about me. Then she looked at my shoes and asked if vintage fashion was making a comeback, because she had seen something similar in a thrift store once. I felt my cheeks flush. Marcus laughed nervously but did not correct her. He did not defend me. He just asked if I wanted something to drink and changed the subject. The visit lasted 2 hours. Most of that time, Priscilla dominated the conversation, talking about her father's investment firm, her mother's charity work, the vacation home in the Hamptons, the ski trips to Aspen. She name-dropped constantly mentioned prices as if they were nothing, and referred to people outside her social circle with barely concealed contempt. Marcus nodded along to everything she said. He agreed with her opinions. He laughed at her jokes. He had become a different person around her, someone polished and eager to please someone I barely recognized. When I hugged him goodbye, I held on a little longer than usual. I told him I loved him and that I was proud of him. He said he loved me too, but his words felt hollow, recited rather than felt. I cried during the drive home. I told myself I was overreacting. Relationships change people. He was growing up, finding his own path. The distance between us was natural, not personal, but the distance only grew. Marcus graduated the following spring. I was not invited to the ceremony. He said there was a limit on guest tickets, and that Priscilla's family needed the extra seats. He would send me pictures. He did send pictures of him in his cap and gown, surrounded by Priscilla and her parents and her siblings. They looked like a catalog family, perfect and gleaming. There was no space in the frame for someone like me. He took a job at Priscilla's father's company in New York City. He moved into a luxury apartment that Priscilla's family owned. He stopped calling almost entirely. I sent him birthday presents, Christmas cards, care packages with his favorite snacks. I never received a thank you or even an acknowledgement that they had arrived. I started to wonder if I had done something wrong. Maybe I had been too overbearing, too clingy, too present in his life. Maybe he needed space to become his own person. Maybe my love had suffocated him. So I pulled back. I stopped calling as often. I waited for him to reach out first. The calls became monthly, then quarterly. Our conversations became surface level about weather and work, nothing real, nothing deep. The brother I had raised, the boy who used to tell me everything, had become a stranger. I found out about the engagement through Facebook. Not a phone call, not a text, not even an email. A social media post. The picture showed Marcus on one knee in what appeared to be a Parisian restaurant, holding open a velvet box with a diamond ring the size of a small planet. Priscilla's hands were pressed to her face in perfectly staged surprise. The caption read, "She said yes," with a heart emoji and a ring emoji. I stared at my phone screen for a long time. My baby brother was getting married, and I had found out the same way as casual acquaintances and distant relatives. I called him that night. He answered on the fourth ring, and I could hear Priscilla's voice in the background asking who it was. He told her it was just his sister, and walked into another room. I congratulated him. I told him I was happy for him. I asked about the wedding plans. He was vague. Priscilla was handling everything. Her family knew the best vendors, the best venues, the best of everything. The wedding would be at a resort outside New York City. The date was set for late September. I asked what role I would have in the wedding. Would I be giving a speech, standing in the wedding party, helping with any of the planning? There was a long pause. Then Marcus said that Priscilla had already chosen her bridesmaids, and the groomsmen were his college friends. There was not really a formal role for siblings on the groom's side. He was sure I would understand. I understood more than he realized. The wedding invitation arrived 2 months later. It was addressed only to me. No +1, no guest. The envelope was expensive, the calligraphy elegant, the paper thick and creamy. Inside was all the information about the ceremony and reception. I noticed that Priscilla's friends had received save the dates 6 months in advance. I had received my invitation just 8 weeks before the event. Still, I was determined to be there. This was my brother's wedding. Despite everything, I loved him. I wanted to watch him marry the woman he had chosen, even if that woman looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her designer shoe. I spent weeks preparing. I saved every extra penny to buy a new dress, something simple but elegant in a soft blue color that brought out my eyes. I found a pair of heels on sale that made me feel almost pretty. I got my hair trimmed and bought makeup I could not really afford. But the most important preparation was the gift I created. I spent hours compiling a photo album of Marcus's life. Every picture I had from his childhood was in there. His first steps, his first day of school, his gap-toothed smile at age 7, the two of us at his high school graduation, his arm around my shoulders, both of us grinning at the camera. I wrote captions beneath each photo, little memories and messages. The day you learned to ride a bike and scraped both knees, you did not cry once. Your first basketball game. You scored 12 points and I lost my voice from cheering. Graduation day, the proudest moment of my life. At the end of the album, I placed a handwritten letter. It was 4 pages long. I told him how much I loved him, how proud I was of the man he had become, how I would always be there for him no matter what. I told him about the sacrifices I had made and how I would make them all over again in a heartbeat. I told him that our parents would be so proud if they could see him now. I poured my entire heart into that letter. Every ounce of love, every hope, every prayer. The night before the wedding, I checked into a hotel near the venue. It cost more than I could comfortably afford, nearly a month's rent. But I wanted to be close. I did not want to be late or stressed. I wanted everything to be perfect. That evening, I saw through the hotel lobby windows that there was a rehearsal dinner happening at the resort next door. Elegantly dressed people were arriving in luxury cars. I spotted Priscilla's mother stepping out of a black Mercedes dripping in diamonds. I had not been invited to the rehearsal dinner. I sat in my hotel room alone, looking through the photo album one more time. I traced my fingers over pictures of Marcus as a little boy, the same little boy I had rocked to sleep after nightmares, the same little boy I had fed when I was starving, the same little boy I had given up my entire future for. I told myself it would be okay. Tomorrow would be beautiful. Tomorrow Marcus would see me and something in his heart would remember. Something in his heart would know. I fell asleep holding the album to my chest, like a shield. The morning of the wedding was crisp and clear. Perfect weather for a perfect day. I woke early, took a long shower, and spent over an hour getting ready. I wanted to look my best. I wanted to walk into that venue with my head held high. The resort was even more spectacular than I had imagined. Manicured gardens stretched as far as the eye could see. White tents dotted the landscape like clouds that had fallen to earth. Waiters in tuxedos carried trays of champagne. Everything gleamed with wealth and privilege. I clutched my gift bag containing the photo album and letter. I had also brought a card with a check inside, $1,000 I had been saving for over a year. It was everything I had. The ceremony was held in a garden pavilion with white chairs arranged in perfect rows. I found my seat, 5th row, not with family, not even close to the front. I was seated behind people I had never seen before, strangers who were apparently more important than the woman who had raised the groom. But I swallowed my hurt and smiled. This was Marcus's day. I would not ruin it with bitterness. The music began. The wedding party processed down the aisle. Priscilla's bridesmaids were carbon copies of her, tall and blonde and dripping with jewelry. The groomsmen were polished young men who looked like they had never worked a day in their lives. Then came Marcus. He walked to the front of the pavilion looking more handsome than I had ever seen him. My heart swelled with pride despite everything. That was my baby brother, the child I had raised, the boy who had made all the sacrifice worthwhile. He did not look at me. His eyes swept over the crowd without stopping at my face. It was as if I was invisible. Priscilla appeared in a cloud of white satin and lace, her veil trailing behind her like something from a fairy tale. She was beautiful. I could not deny that. She practically floated down the aisle on her father's arm. The ceremony was traditional and brief. They exchanged vows they had clearly written themselves, though Priscilla's sounded like they had been written by a professional. Marcus promised to love her forever. She promised the same. They kissed, and the crowd erupted in applause. I clapped too. I smiled. I blinked back tears that were equal parts joy and grief. After the ceremony, guests were directed to the reception hall for cocktails, while the wedding party took photographs. I wandered through the crowd alone, not recognizing anyone, not being recognized by anyone. An hour later, we were invited into the main reception room. It was a ballroom transformed into a wedding wonderland. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across white tablecloths. Centerpieces of white roses and orchids perfumed the air. A live band played softly in the corner. I looked at the seating chart near the entrance, searching for my name. Table 17. I made my way across the room, passing tables 1 through 16. Table 17 was in the far corner of the ballroom, closest to the doors that led to the service area and restrooms. It was as far from the head table as physically possible. The people already seated at table 17 looked uncomfortable. I realized with a sinking feeling that they were not guests at all. They were staff members who had been given seats because of a last-minute shortage. A catering manager, a backup photographer, a florist who had helped with the arrangements. I was seated with the help. I felt the first stirrings of real anger, but I pushed it down. Maybe there had been a mistake. Maybe someone had made an error with the seating chart. I would find Marcus later and sort it out. I pulled out my chair and looked down at my place card. The card was white with elegant gold lettering. But it did not say Zafira. It said one word, Freeloader. And beneath that single word in smaller script, finally stopped mooching off my husband. My hand trembled as I picked up the card. I read it again, hoping I had misunderstood. But the words were clear, unmistakable, deliberately cruel. The people at my table had noticed. A woman across from me, the catering manager, looked at the card with wide eyes. She quickly looked away, embarrassed on my behalf. I felt like the floor had dropped out beneath my feet. 15 years of sacrifice. 15 years of sleepless nights and skipped meals and abandoned dreams. This was how my brother repaid me. This was what I was worth to him. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several nearby guests turned to look. I scanned the room and found the head table where Marcus and Priscilla sat, surrounded by family and the wedding party. They were laughing about something. Priscilla's hand rested possessively on Marcus's arm. I started walking toward them. My legs moved on their own. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my temples. I was halfway across the room when someone stepped in front of me. It was Priscilla's mother, Eleanor. She was wearing a champagne-colored gown and a diamond necklace that probably cost more than my house. She smiled, but her eyes were cold. She asked if she could help me with something, her tone making it clear that I did not belong anywhere near her family. I said I needed to speak with my brother. Eleanor's smile widened. She said she knew exactly who I was. Priscilla had told her all about me, the freeloading sister who had clung to Marcus for years, living rent-free in his dead parents' house, probably expecting handouts for the rest of my life. I felt like I had been slapped. I told her she did not know anything about me, about what I had given up, about what I had done for Marcus. Eleanor laughed. She said I should be grateful I was even invited. If it were up to her, I would not be here at all. But Marcus had insisted, and Priscilla was generous enough to allow it. By now, other guests had noticed the confrontation. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. I called Marcus's name. My voice was louder than I intended. Heads turned. The band stopped playing. Marcus stood up from the head table. He looked annoyed, embarrassed. He walked toward me with quick, impatient strides. I held up the place card. I asked him if he could explain this. I asked if this was his idea of a joke. He took the card and looked at it. His expression did not change. No shock, no horror, no remorse. He told me to calm down. He said I was making a scene. He said it was just a joke, something Priscilla had done as a prank, that I was overreacting as usual. As usual. I asked him if he understood what those words meant, if he understood how much I had sacrificed for him. I had given up my scholarship, my career, my dreams, my 20s, everything to raise him. And this was how he thanked me. Marcus sighed. He said I always did this, always brought up the past, always reminded him of everything I had done, as if he owed me forever. He said I needed to let it go. He said I had gotten plenty in return, that I had lived in our parents' house all these years, without paying rent, that I had benefited from the situation too. Benefited. I stared at him. This person who looked like my brother, but was a stranger. This person who had forgotten or chosen to forget everything we had been through together. Behind him, Priscilla was smirking. Her mother looked triumphant. Something inside me broke. But something else, something stronger woke up. I had a choice in that moment. I could cry. I could beg. I could apologize for causing a scene and slink back to my seat with the caterers and pretend nothing had happened. Or I could tell the truth. I chose the truth. I turned and walked toward the stage where the band had been playing. The microphone stood in its stand waiting. Behind me, I heard voices calling my name, telling me to stop. But I did not stop. I climbed the 3 steps to the stage. I took the microphone. I turned to face the room. 200 pairs of eyes stared back at me. The room was utterly silent. I began to speak. I introduced myself. I said my name was Zafira and I was the groom's sister. But I was not just his sister. For the past 15 years, I had been his mother, his father, his everything. I told them about the night our parents died. I told them about being 19 years old and becoming the legal guardian of an 8-year-old boy. I told them about giving up my scholarship to the architecture school I had dreamed of attending since I was 12. I told them about the 3 jobs, the 4 hours of sleep, the week I lived on $12. I told them about skipping meals so Marcus could eat. I told them about teaching him to ride a bike, to tie a tie, to ask a girl to the school dance. I told them about sitting in the front row at every basketball game, about helping him with college applications, about taking out loans in my own name so he could get his degree. My voice was steady, clear. I was not crying. I was not shouting. I was simply telling the truth. Then I held up the place card. I said that today, after everything I had done, this was how I had been welcomed. I read the words out loud, Freeloader. Finally stopped mooching off my husband. A gasp went through the room. I saw guests exchanging horrified glances. An older woman at a nearby table put her hand over her mouth. I said I had not come here to cause trouble. I had come to celebrate my brother's wedding, to give him this gift I had spent months creating, to tell him one more time how much I loved him. I gestured toward the gift bag I had left at my table. I said there was a photo album inside with every memory of his childhood, and a letter that said everything I had ever wanted to tell him. But clearly I said my presence was not wanted. My love was not valued. My sacrifice meant nothing. A man stood up from a table near the front. I recognized him vaguely. He was one of Marcus's college friends. His name was Derek. Derek spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. He said he had lived in the same dorm as Marcus for 4 years. He said Zafira had visited every month, had sent care packages every week, had paid for things Marcus could not afford. He said she was not a freeloader. She was a hero. Other voices joined in. Another friend confirmed the story. A former teacher who had been invited said she remembered Zafira coming to every parent-teacher conference, every school event, stepping up when no one else would. The room was no longer on Priscilla's side. I could see it in their faces. Shock, anger, sympathy for me, not for the bride. I set the microphone back in its stand. I said I would leave now. I said I had not wanted to ruin anyone's perfect day. But I refused to be treated like trash. I refused to accept a label I had never earned. I walked off the stage with my head held high. On my way to the door, I stopped at my table and picked up the gift bag. I placed it on the nearest table where people could see it. I said anyone who wanted to know who Marcus really was, where he came from, and who loved him before any of them knew he existed, was welcome to look inside. Then I walked out. I did not run. I did not look back, even when I heard Marcus calling my name. I stepped out into the sunshine, took a deep breath, and kept walking. Behind me, I learned later the reception fell apart. A third of the guests left early, offended by what they had witnessed. The photo album was passed from table to table, and people cried looking at pictures of Marcus as a little boy, reading the captions I had written with such love. Priscilla's father tried to salvage the situation with a toast, but no one was listening. The band played to a half-empty room. The $1,000 cake went largely uneaten. The wedding everyone had planned so carefully, the perfect day that was supposed to launch Marcus and Priscilla into high society, became the scandal of the season. Within weeks, the story had spread through their entire social circle. The family who called a grieving sister a freeloader. The groom who forgot where he came from. Priscilla's reputation never recovered. Neither did her family's. The days after the wedding were the hardest of my life. Harder in some ways than losing my parents. When your parents die, you mourn them with the world's permission. Everyone understands that loss. They bring casseroles. They send flowers. They hold your hand and tell you time will heal. But when your brother betrays you, when the child you raised as your own, looks at you with cold eyes and calls you a moocher, there is no template for that grief. There are no casseroles. No one tells you how to heal. I spent the first 3 days in bed. I did not eat. I did not shower. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past 15 years in my mind. Had I done something wrong? Had I loved him too much, too little? Had I been too strict, too lenient? Had I failed somehow in ways I could not see? My phone rang constantly. Marcus. Aunt Ruth, who suddenly had opinions after years of silence. Numbers I did not recognize. I let every call go to voicemail. On the 4th day, I got out of bed. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself. 34 years old, exhausted, heartbroken, but still standing. I took a shower. I ate a piece of toast. Small victories. That afternoon, I received a message from Derek, the friend who had spoken up at the wedding. He apologized on behalf of everyone who had stood by and let this happen. He told me I was one of the strongest people he had ever seen. More messages followed. People who had been at the wedding, strangers, whose names I did not recognize, reaching out to tell me they were moved by my story. Several shared their own experiences of family betrayal, of being taken for granted, of giving everything and receiving nothing in return. I was not alone. I had never been alone. A week after the wedding, a woman named Margaret called. She had been at the reception. She was 67 years old, a retired teacher, and she had been close friends with my mother decades ago. She invited me to coffee. I almost said no, but something made me say yes. We met at a small cafe downtown. Margaret had kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a bun. She ordered tea and spent the first 10 minutes telling me about my mother's stories I had never heard about who she had been as a young woman before she was my mother. Then Margaret said something that changed everything. She said my mother had talked about me constantly in those last years. She had been so proud of me, so certain that I would do great things. She had told Margaret once that she was not worried about dying because she knew I would take care of Marcus. She knew I would be strong enough. Margaret took my hand. She said my mother was right. I cried for the first time since the wedding, not from sadness, but from release, from feeling seen. In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. I enrolled in online classes, finally pursuing the architecture degree I had abandoned 15 years earlier. I was 34 years old, starting over surrounded by students half my age. But I was doing it. I was finally doing it. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in grief and family trauma. She helped me understand that I had spent so long caring for Marcus that I had forgotten how to care for myself. She helped me see that my worth was not measured by his gratitude or lack of it. I made new friends, real friends who liked me for who I was, not what I could give them. I joined a book club. I started jogging in the mornings. I planted a garden in the backyard, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for. 3 months after the wedding, Marcus called. I almost did not answer. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something made me pick up. His voice was different, quieter, hesitant. He said he needed to apologize. He said he had not known about the place card that Priscilla had done it, without his knowledge that he had been horrified when he saw what it said. I listened in silence. He said things had been difficult since the wedding. People treated them differently now. Priscilla was angry all the time. Her parents blamed him for the scandal. There were cracks appearing in the perfect life he thought he had built. He said he missed me. He said he had been wrong. I took a deep breath. I told him I forgave him, not for his sake, but for mine. Carrying anger was too heavy. I needed my hands free to build my new life. But I also told him that forgiveness did not mean forgetting. It did not mean pretending nothing had happened. It did not mean returning to the way things were. I told him I needed time, space. I needed to focus on myself for once after 15 years of focusing on everyone else. I said when he was ready to truly understand the value of family, not just when he needed something, but always, he could come find me. Then I hung up. I have not heard from him since. Part of me hopes he will reach out someday, genuinely changed. Part of me has made peace with the possibility that he never will. The last I heard, Marcus and Priscilla were having problems. Her family's social standing had suffered. The fairy tale was crumbling. But that is not my concern anymore. 1 year after the wedding, I stood in my backyard holding a certificate. I had completed my first year of architecture school with honors. I was 35 years old, and I was finally living the life I had put on hold when I was 19. I looked up at the sky. I thought about my parents wherever they were. I told them I had kept my promise. I had raised Marcus. I had loved him with everything I had. And now finally, I was learning to love myself too. I thought about what I had learned. That sacrifice is beautiful, but self-respect is essential. That you cannot pour from an empty cup. That loving someone does not mean accepting their cruelty. That walking away is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. I thought about the woman I had been, the 19-year-old girl who gave up everything. I was proud of her. She had done her best. But I was even more proud of who I was becoming. Someone who knew her worth. Someone who demanded respect. Someone who understood that being kind did not mean being a doormat. On my kitchen counter was a letter from a local architecture firm offering me an internship for the following summer. A new beginning. A second chance at the dream I thought I had lost forever. I picked up the letter and smiled. Some stories do not have happy endings. But they have real endings. Honest endings. Endings where you walk out of the fire not unscathed, but transformed. This is my ending, and it is also my beginning. I am Zafira. I raised my brother. I lost him to his own choices. And then I found myself. That is a trait I can live with. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever given everything to someone who did not appreciate it? Have you ever had to choose between your self-respect and someone you love? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and you might help someone else who is going through the same thing. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who has been giving too much and receiving too little, please share this video with them. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I wish you the courage to know your worth, the strength to demand respect, and the wisdom to let go of those who refuse to give it. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, your love is a gift. Do not waste it on those who see it as an obligation.